Jaylon Braxton is the most important offensive signing for Lane Kiffin, and we will tell you why.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The Locked On Ole Miss podcast is the most watched Ole Miss podcast out there. I'm your host, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media and a former Ole Miss staff member. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who make the show what it is. Today, we're diving into the most important newcomers, not the most talented, not the best newcomers. These are the most important newcomers for 2025. If Ole Miss is going to make a serious playoff run, they likely hit on these five players. These evaluations are absolutely crucial for the staff to nail, and it all starts with Jaylon Braxton, who has massive shoes to fill with Tre Amos moving on. While many will point to the trenches, I believe that Braxton's dominance is the key to Ole Miss's success. We'll also highlight four more impact players who must deliver next season as well. Plus, Ole Miss is on commitment watch for a top 100 player, and we'll break down what that could mean for the program. And before we wrap it up, you'll get to set on tonight's huge basketball matchup with Kentucky. It is a must-watch game for Ole Miss fans. And don't forget to find a second listen on the network. Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC or Corey Burton at Locked On Vandy offers more SEC insights. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. So we're past the drop ad date at Ole Miss, and we're kind of where we're going to be at this point. So we're about 90 to 95% of what the team in 2025 is going to be. So we can start looking at the roster and what the most important areas are and who is going to be counted on most, because there's not going to be anybody signed after this point that is a major contributor in 2025. If there is, I will be completely shocked, and that is kind of a first time since the transfer portal has become a thing. But as it sits right now, we can kind of look at the 90 and 95% of the roster and all of the playmakers that are going to be on this roster. So I started thinking about who the most important signings were. And this is both transfer portal class and freshman class. Who are the five players that Ole Miss absolutely must hit on, and who is the most important player? And obviously I started with Jaylon Braxton, a cornerback, coming in as the most important signee that Ole Miss had. Ole Miss absolutely has to hit on this prospect. When you look at the players that are coming in on the secondary, there's a lot of players that's good, but no superstars that have come in technically if you just look at the on paper. Jaylon Braxton was a freshman all-SEC player, a really good player. And if you go on Twitter and talk about Jaylon Braxton to say, I don't know, Chris Paul's dad, he will let you know his eyes kind of lights up when he talks about him. Jaylon Braxton has a whole lot of potential to kind of be the Tre Amos replacement that Ole Miss needs. Why I went with a defensive back over an offensive line or a defensive lineman is I think the Ole Miss front seven is going to be pretty good next year. You're not going to have Walter Nolan or Princely and Monmielen, but it's going to be a pretty good unit with Suntarine Perkins and William Eccles and Cam Franklin. Those guys in that big defensive line class that was brought in, they're going to be pretty good. So the question becomes the secondary, and Jaylon Braxton is the lead candidate to be that dominant cornerback opposite of Chris Graves, who himself is a former top 100 recruit. So the cornerback position, if Jaylon Braxton comes in and becomes that dominant figure, is something that Ole Miss doesn't necessarily have to worry about, and you can worry about other positions on that defense. The second player that absolutely Ole Miss must hit on in their evaluation and get production from is Shekai Mills Knight, the running back out of the Baylor School out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Is a true freshman. He is coming in. He started in the Navy All-American game. He's about 225 pounds. He looked like a man among boys, literally. He has the ability to be everything you would want a running back to be. But for Ole Miss to get to where they want to be, they need a running game. something they didn't really have last year, especially after Henry Parrish got injured. So Shekai Mills Knight becomes a dominant figure for Ole Miss in this class as far as will he or won't he. I mean, you have Logan Diggs, who flashed a little bit in the Gator Bowl, coming back. When you have Kewan Lacey, Trey Hall, when you have other running backs, Jordan Simmons is the fifth one. The main running back in this running back room that is going to take Ole Miss's running back room from good to great is likely Shekai Mills Knight. If he can perform like many people are saying that he can, Ole Miss is going to be really good at the running back position, and we've all seen this offense when they've been very good at the running back position. So we'll see. Shekai Mills Knight is an absolutely must hit on the evaluation. Number 3, Keon Young. We talked about Jaylon Braxton in the number 1. The number 3 is Keon Young, because at the safety position, Ole Miss needs to replace Trey Washington, who came immediately after A.J. Finley. Ever since Lane Kiffin has been at Ole Miss, you've had a free safety that has kind of taken over that defense. I think Keon Young has that ability. And Keon Young is also kind of like me, hedging my bets a little bit, because it could be Cortez Thomas, it could be LaDarian Clardy. One of those 3 guys have a chance to be the dominant guy in the secondary for 3 years. Keon Young has all sorts of talent. I talked to him at the Under Armour All-American game, and, he was very excited about what was going on. He is somebody that is well aware of what he could do, and his football intelligence is what he talked about was so big for Keon Young. His football intelligence is what separates him. And when you look at what Trey Lawrence brought in, what A.J. Finley brought in, Keon Young brings that to the next level. Now, Cortez Thomas, who was at the Under Armour All-American game, talked to him as well. And he basically took a leadership role in the back part of that defense, getting people lined up, which is kind of a big deal as well. So that's one of the reasons that I think it could be one of those 3. I'm just going with Keon Young, honestly, because he lives 15 minutes from my house. And Keon Young, I really like him as a player. And the Lakeland Dreadnoughts, probably the best nickname in all of sports. But Keon Young, or one of those safeties, has to come through this year. Number 4, Caleb Odom. Caleb Odom is a guy that is going to allow so much versatility of the Ole Miss offense and what they can do. He needs to be on the field quite a bit, but he needs to earn it. He needs to be good enough to where the defense has to pay attention to him. And if that happens, Ole Miss can go seamlessly from 11 to 12 to 13 personnel without really changing what you're doing offensively. And if that happens, the defense is going to be kind of tied up in knots, even with the helmet communication. I think Caleb Odom is a major piece of what he can do because of the versatility he gives the offense. He is a jumbo wide receiver. He's somebody at 230 pounds is playing wide receiver. So he has a tight end's body. So he could be in 12 personnel and Ole Miss is running their normal offense at wide receiver. He could come in and play near the line of scrimmage, and all of a sudden that becomes more of a jumbo set that can help out the rushing game. Caleb Odom is a huge piece for the versatility of the offense and for Austin Simmons. I hate to know. I really wish Caleb Odom would have come to Ole Miss as a true freshman. I think he'd have played more at Ole Miss than he did in Alabama, but he's here now, and that is the important thing. And finally is Patrick Kutas. The first time I've really hit the lines, like I said, I think the defensive line is going to be fine, but Kutas is going to be important because he is that interior offensive lineman that is going to help them run the football. Him and Delano Townsend and Bryson Sanders. I'm very excited for Bryson Sanders as a starting center. But Patrick Kutas is going to be a potential leader of that offensive line, especially the run game. Diego Pounds and Jaden Williams, they're good to go on the outside. It's all about the interior of the offensive line and getting that right. And Kutas was much wanted by Arkansas before he left. They really wanted to hold on to him so much that they didn't play him the last couple of games, so he didn't burn a red shirt because they wanted to make sure that he was around. Patrick Kutas hit the portal, Ole Miss got him. He is going to be a very good piece for Ole Miss, probably better than any other interior offensive lineman that Ole Miss brought in a year ago. Patrick Kutas was one of the top interior offensive linemen of the transfer portal for Ole Miss and for, honestly, anybody. So that should be really interesting. Those are the 5 players that Ole Miss absolutely has to hit on the evaluations of before this season. If Ole Miss is going to do what they want to do, those 5 players absolutely have to be the real deal. So big recruiting news. Jareylon McCoy decommitted from LSU. Could this Tupelo star be on his way to Ole Miss? We'll break down why the Ole Miss Rebels are in a strong position. Looking for tickets to your next big event, whether it's a concert, comedy show, or sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Game Time Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you why. With Game Time Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so you do not have to waste time scrolling through endless ticket listings. I've been using Game Time Picks for a while now, and here's why I love it. The curated deals make it easier to find great seats at great prices. No more searching through thousands of options. I recently snagged a super deal to go see Midland play in a concert in Tampa for a prime seat, and I could not believe the value. It was a steal. The seat view feature is a game changer, by the way. Before I even hit buy, I could see exactly what my view would look like from any venue. It makes the whole experience that much smoother. And the best part, you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund you 110% of the difference. Plus, with your tickets, they're guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Ready to make your next event even better? Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So yesterday, Jareylon McCoy, a defensive lineman from Tupelo High School, decommitted from LSU. Jareylon McCoy was at the Under Armour game as an underclassman. All of the people there really were fired up about him. But full disclosure, when we got down there, everybody knew he's about to commit to LSU. So I didn't focus on Jareylon McCoy. I was over with Deuce Gerald's and Cortez Thomas and Keon Young. Those players to see exactly what they had. I knew that Jareylon McCoy had a chance to circle back around because whenever you're 50 miles away from Ole Miss is always going to be in the game. But at that moment, because he was just about to commit to LSU, there was no sense doing a whole lot of content on him because of how it would look. But Jareylon McCoy is a defensive lineman. He is 6'6.5", 245 pounds, which means he's probably going to grow a little bit. I think that by the time he is a junior in college, he'll be 6'6", 280, excuse me. And if that happens, he's going to be a solid 3 technique, somebody that could be real similar to what Walter Nolan was for Ole Miss this season. Jareylon McCoy is a really good player. He is somebody that everybody should be excited about. When you look at his rankings on all the sites, he is a consensus 4-star player. And if you want to look at the consensus, he's ranked 88th in the country, the number 8 defensive lineman, and the 5th player in the state of Mississippi. Which that's also crazy to think about, that 4 players are ahead of the number 88 player in the country in Mississippi. This is a good year for Mississippi. So rated as a 4-star player, you looking on 3, 88, 247, 204, ESPN 95, and he went to the Under Armour All-American game a year ago, so that kind of lets you know where he stands. And Rivals has him at 114. A really good player. Now, the reason this has popped up is because you started to see a bunch of RPMs and crystal balls that have hit that he's going to go to Ole Miss eventually. I don't know when the commitment is liable to happen, but Chad Simmons, the director of recruiting at On3, believes that he is going to flip to Ole Miss. And the reason they believe that is because Jareylon McCoy has spent the last 2 of the last 3 weekends in Oxford, Mississippi, including at the last one at the junior day. And it was pretty obvious in the recruiting process, this was said, and this actually got out, that after the first time Jareylon McCoy visited Ole Miss, that it came out that he's like, hey, I made a promise to Brian Kelly not to visit while I was committed and all of that. And so this will be my last visit in a while. And then junior day, he popped up again secretly, ended up decommitted to LSU because of that. So if he's not going to LSU, that leaves pretty much Ole Miss and Alabama as the leaders for his services, and we'll see exactly how it goes. He's a good football player. He's somebody at his size right now. You look at him, he's like, okay, he's a defensive end. And he's probably looking as a 5 technique or a 3 technique where he's actually going to grow into. Right now, he's probably a strong side defensive end of a 4-3. But when you look at these players, they're going to grow up, and he has an unbelievable frame that can take a lot of weight on it. So it would not surprise me if he ends up at Ole Miss 6'6", 300 pounds, and just absolutely a monster in the middle of the defense. If he ends up in Oxford, Mississippi, the sky's the limit on this kid. And whenever you figure that he just took in Mason Dunn, just signed with Ole Miss fought off Alabama and kept him, which is good for a Tupelo recruit. Ole Miss has had trouble historically recruiting Tupelo for whatever reason. It seems like every big-time player ended up at Mississippi State, which is kind of funny because Oxford and Starkville's roughly about the same distance away from Tupelo. But it seems like most of the kids ended up going to Mississippi State. Well, that has started to turn over the last couple of recruiting cycles. Lane Kiffin has done a good job at Tupelo, kind of coinciding to when Tupelo football has become good again. And Ole Miss ended up getting a cornerback commit in the 2023 class, I think, signed Mason Dunn this year, and then you have Jareylon McCoy in 2025, and there's also a running back at Tupelo that is currently committed to Mississippi State that is going to probably be a dogfight as this goes. This is somebody that looked pretty good in the state championship game. So Jareylon McCoy committing to Ole Miss would be a big deal, a legitimately big deal. Like I said, he's a consensus top 100 level player. When you look at that, he's a 4-star all the way across the board and was a junior Under Armour All-American candidate. And when you consider Deuce Gerald's, and we talked about him yesterday, what kind of a big deal it is with him, and you get Jareylon McCoy and Deuce Gerald's, all of a sudden you have the makings of an elite defensive line that under Pete Golding and Lane Kiffin has a chance to really build up that defense again after this group leaves. The group that's at Ole Miss right now probably is going to be led by Xavier Harris, who this is likely going to be his last season at Ole Miss. Suntaran Perkins, this is his 3rd year, which means he's draft eligible, and he has a chance to be SEC Defensive Player of the Year. And you have the younger guys that are in there, but you're trying to remake that. And you bring in a Deuce Gerald, you bring in a Jareylon McCoy. And you can see how this defensive line class really builds itself up. And Ole Miss defensively just kind of keeps going and going, kind of the way those Alabama teams did, those Georgia teams did, to where you're just stacking players on top of players. Let's see. Last season was probably the most talented Ole Miss football team that has ever played at the University of Mississippi. Don't give me 59, 60 and all that. No. This team, if they would have just played straight, Matt Luke rules of managing the game, Ole Miss likely goes 12-0. They kick their field goals. They do what they have to do, but they didn't. And I don't want to harp on it too much, but it's worth noting that team and that roster was unlike anything that Ole Miss has seen previously. This year, the drop-off isn't that far. That's the thing that everybody should notice what's going on. The drop-off isn't that far. This is a very talented roster. This roster would probably likely be in the top 3 or 4 all-time at Ole Miss. The thing that they need is experience, and they've built up the talent and everything they can do. It's all about experience en route to that playoff journey that hopefully everybody thinks that Ole Miss can go on if they handle a little bit of business. Ole Miss takes on Kentucky tonight at the Pavilion in a crucial matchup, but the Rebels want more than just a tournament bid. It's a must-win game. Can they make a statement? We'll break it all down next. All right. Ole Miss has Kentucky tonight, and after the game, we'll have our instant overreaction like we have through this. It's the viewership of that has gone up and up and up, and that is pretty cool to see. But Ole Miss has an important game against Kentucky. This Kentucky team can beat anybody on any floor. They went to Tennessee, knocked out the Volunteers, but they got beat by Arkansas at home. So they can lose games. And this is a defensively challenged Kentucky basketball team that seems overly reliant on the three-point shot. So if they're hitting it, if they're making their jump shots, they're going to be really hard to beat. But if Ole Miss has good three-point defense, this should be a situation you can get this game in a half-court game, play a little bit of strong defense, and just kind of wear down the Kentucky Wildcats. The players to watch in this game are the players to watch seemingly in every game. These are the three players that you need to pay attention to every single game. I know we talk about Malik Dia, we talk about Michael Brown-Jones, but these three players will determine whether or not Ole Miss is up here or down here, and it's what level of a game it is. And the first off is Tre Davis. He had a really good game against the Texas Longhorn. He's probably the reason that Ole Miss was able to pull off that victory. He was non-existent and didn't show much against the Auburn Tigers. For whatever reason, it just happens. Ended up fouling out. I think he was like 2 points is what he scored for the game. The other player is Sean Pedulla. Sean Pedulla is somebody that went for 29 against Auburn. He's playing very, very well right now, and he's been very good going to the basket, and that's kind of going to be a big deal against the Kentucky Wildcats. And then there's Matthew Morrell. Morrell is somebody that as he gets better and better and gets a little bit more like himself, Ole Miss's basketball team will get better and better. The goal is to get him ready for March. It's going to be all about March. If Ole Miss can get to 8 wins, as soon as Ole Miss gets to 8 wins, they need to shut him down for a week, in my opinion. But if he is good to go by March, Ole Miss has a chance to make a run. I've talked about this in reaction videos. As far as Ole Miss can go in the NCAA tournament, entirely depends on matchups. Who Ole Miss has in the bracket with them. It's very unpredictable of how it could be, but if Ole Miss has a favorable matchup, they can make a run deep into the tournament. If they have a tough matchup, they could be a weekend one and done. So we'll see exactly how that goes. The keys in this basketball game is be efficient offensively against a team that struggles on defense. Don't force bad shots. Make that team work, especially with the way the Ole Miss uses the shot clock and how long that Kentucky is going to have to defend. Shooting the ball is more difficult when you're defending for long stretches of time, so don't get into a running match with them. Make them play defense. Make them use their head, and if you can be efficient against that Kentucky defense, you have a chance to wear them down a little bit. 2, this is almost a scheduled post, and it's in every single keys to victory. Be competitive on the boards against Kentucky. Do not let Kentucky dominate you in the rebounding department. If you can avoid that happening, you will be all right. And if you have a situation like the first 4 games to where Ole Miss is even with Kentucky, Ole Miss is going to win the game. You're not going to beat this Ole Miss team if you don't out-rebound them. That's just the way it goes. And the third thing is run Kentucky off the three-point line and force them to play a half-court, slow-down game. If Ole Miss can do this, it will be very, very good for them. And you have a chance to where you just like stretch out the lead, and it looks a lot like we have seen it look in the past. The prediction of this game, this is a game that I think Ole Miss should win. I think Ole Miss has the better team than Kentucky. It's not very often that you say that Ole Miss has a better team than Kentucky, but this year I think that is the case. Now, Kentucky lost to Arkansas. They're a wounded animal. So to be careful with that wounded animal, they could come down to Oxford with a little bit of fire in their belly and ways to kind of make things right for their fan base. But as it sits right now, I do think Ole Miss has a little bit better team. With Pedulla playing well, if you can get something from Tre Davis, and Malik Dia absolutely has a chance to dominate in this game, you have a chance that Ole Miss wins this basketball game, goes on the road on Saturday, wins against LSU, and all of a sudden you have 7 wins in the Southeastern Conference, and you only need one more. And like I said, that is the race to 8 this season. It is all about the race to 8, and we'll see what happens indeed for Ole Miss. So just so everybody knows, we are in the process. We've done a lot of hard work over the last 6 months, and it's been really hard to keep the secret of what's going on. But looking at the Locked On Ole Miss podcast and the Locked On Network as a whole, they're about to launch a Roku over-the-air or OTT app that includes all their live channels, that includes every single Locked On podcast in whichever sport you want to look at, and it's going to be a game changer. It's also going to integrate with the Tegna TV stations. For people that don't know, there's probably close to 150 Tegna TV stations, I think, out there. Every major market, they seemingly have one in there. What Locked On is ready to do and is about to do is going to try and strategically play to kind of take over this sports coverage market video-wise. And the Locked On Ole Miss podcast is going to be a big part of that. I think this is one of the best-looking podcasts on the network, and I think they would tell you that. So it will be interesting to see exactly what happens. But you're going to see these Tegna TV stations really embrace the Locked On shows. You're going to see the Locked On Ole Miss podcast and the Locked On Podcast Network on its own app and on a whole bunch of these fast TV channels. If you've noticed on these streaming services, they all have their little guide with different streaming networks. Locked On is slowly building on a network to where they're showing up on all of those as well. It's part of the reason for my large numbers growth, that and AI. I use AI like absolutely crazy for what I need to do, because typing is difficult to me because of the brain surgery. So AI does a lot of the typing work for me. But those things, when you look at the special app that is coming in the next couple of weeks, when you look at the fact that you're going to see the Locked On Ole Miss podcast and other Locked On shows on these fast TV channels across all streaming services, we are going to set it up to where basically this Locked On network becomes a real thing with the way that this on-demand coverage of sports has become. So like me, I watch Locked On Tigers every single day to see how the Detroit Tigers are doing. I'll be able to set up a playlist of my favorite Locked On podcast and just let them go for an hour and a half. It'll be really cool. Trust me, this is a game changer and an absolutely big deal. And it's something that other people just absolutely do not have. So I hate to brag, but it is what it is. Anyway, thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the #1 Ole Miss podcast. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC podcast. Host Chris Gordy holds no punches covering the best conference in college football. Find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Hotty toddy, everyone. And remember, analytics is just the old English word that means bad football. We'll see you tomorrow.